when Arturas Karnisovas ended the season-ending press conference talking about the changes that needed to come to the Chicago Bulls organization. Of course, a lot of Bulls fans initially went to the roster, which still may come. But until that time happens where the Bulls can make changes to the roster, they've now really filled out their coaching staff. We're going to talk about the two coaches that they've hired over the last couple of days and why it does signify a bit of a change as far as the voices in that locker room. We're also going to look at some of the sleeper options for the Chicago Bulls in the first round of this draft and dive into the mailbag. All that and more right after this.
You are now tuned in to Chicago Bulls Central, your number one place for all Chicago Bulls news and content.
What's going on, Bulls fans? Welcome to another episode of Chicago Bulls Central, your number one spot for everything Chicago Bulls related. I'm the host there, Haize, but more importantly, you guys can follow the channel at Bulls Central Pod on every social media platform we happen to be on. With that being said, let's go ahead and get into this content, y'all. So the Chicago Bulls have made two new coaching hires. And while the assistant coaching and the roles and exactly how much, that impacts the team could be, a multitude of different things depending on, how much the head coach actually trusts the role that they give the assistant coaches. But I like what the Bulls have done here with their coaching staff so far through the two hires that they've made. They still have another spot on the back end of Billy Donovan's bench. So they first started this off by hiring Wes Unseld Jr. Now, this is a guy who was over 2 years the coach of the Washington Wizards. He ended up getting fired in the middle of last season. And his stint with the Washington Wizards, we talked about it, right? It wasn't great. But when you look at what Unseld has done as an assistant coach, he's a guy, a veteran, over 16 years as an assistant. He was with the Orlando Magic from 2012 to 15. He was with the Golden State Warriors at one point as well. This guy is just he's worked with a lot of teams. He was with the Denver Nuggets around the same time that AK was there. He worked with Mike Malone. He was given a lot of credit for the development of Nikola Jokic, Jamal Murray, Michael Porter Jr., among others. And this is a guy who, because of his years of service, we know what he's going to bring in the fact that as an assistant, he thrives as an assistant, right? And some people are just meant to be assistant head coaches. I like the signing when it was made. I like the fact that he's going to be the lead assistant. But then the Chicago Bulls yesterday made another hire for a co-lead assistant. So you have two lead assistants, and that's Dan Craig, who has been under Ty Lue for the last 4 seasons. He was with Miami Heat after that. Him and Eric Spoelstra's story is a lot similar. Is the fact that Eric Spoelstra worked up his way up through the video department. Same thing with Dan Craig. He worked up through the video department. Initially, he coached their G League team at some point. He was in charge of scouting and player development with kind of his special assignments in that. And so what the Bulls have done here is they've brought in two veteran coaches with good voices, good mindsets, who's worked under really good coaches, championship-level coaches. Dan Craig, technically, as an assistant, is a 3-time NBA champion. So, because of that, it does change the voices in the room. And, when we did the live stream on it, Steve-O described it as that, you need a new sound. And that is what it seems like the Bulls are trying to craft here, is a new sound in that locker room, new expectations. These are guys who come from two very, very good coaching trees. And, while a lot of Bulls fans, more pessimistic ones, and like I said, I understand your guys' pessimism, because if you're being honest, what has really worked with this team, right? As far as on Wes Unseld Jr. and saying, well, if he's so good, why didn't he work with Washington? Well, like I said, some people are just better as assistants. Then you have Dan Craig here as well. So, and they are added to John Bryant, who will be on the back end of the bench for the Chicago Bulls. And so this seems like what the Bulls were focused on is adding some veterans here to help support Billy Donovan. I have my own kind of theory on what could happen, not necessarily this offseason, but in the future. But we'll get to that in a minute. But the Bulls targeted coaches that had head coaching experience. It actually came out yesterday as well by Mark Stein that the Bulls also interviewed David Fizdale and Dwayne Casey, to bring into this coaching staff as well. Those are two other guys who have head coaching experience. So it seems like that's what the Bulls' focus is during this, in adding new assistants, is let's bring in some people who have prior head coaching experience, who have been in this game for a while, right? And who can probably relate to players. They brought in two guys in Craig and Unseld that have a history of developing players. And we know that is something that this Bulls team has not done very well, is develop, right? We got in the new player development department. They're going to be a huge part of that. But again, the coaches are the ones that travel. They're in and ins and outs with players every day. They're doing the tape reviews with the players. So having two coaches who who have that experience could be huge for the Bulls. Now, it comes down to this, though. How much is Billy Donovan going to trust them? I always use the comparison of Tom Thibodeau, with on Doc Rivers' staff, because he wasn't just an assistant coach. He was basically their defensive coordinator. They defaulted to Tom Thibodeau. The players on there will tell you during that championship run, it was Tom Thibodeau calling defensive assignments. When they were on defense, it was Tom Thibodeau in those huddles, whereas Doc Rivers really allowed Tibbs to blossom in what his strengths were. If Billy Donovan is willing, right, to allow coaches who have strengths to kind of be that voice in that area, I always talked about with Billy Donovan, it's the situational awareness. And if he feels and can trust these coaches to have kind of better situational awareness with certain things, I do think that it can be a bigger change. But ultimately, it still comes down to the roster. We still need to make changes to the roster. We still have a very flawed roster at that. So, that's all going to come with time. Right now, we can't change the roster. But I like what AK is doing with this coaching staff. I like hearing the fact that they interviewed David Fizdale and Dwayne Casey as well. Like, I like that because it shows, again, moving with intention. And, we haven't seen a whole hell of a lot of that from AK here over the last few years. And he said he wanted to get back to what they did their first year there. And part of what they did then was move with intention. Now, we could talk about the results of it because of the Lonzo Ball injury, Zach LaVine not being 100%, Vooch on the decline. But they had a very big intentionality about what roster they were trying to build and how those pieces kind of fit together theoretically on paper. And while they were all healthy, it looked like it was working, right? So, hopefully we're getting back to that intentionality from this front office. And yeah, that's my hope. But, overall, and this has been my working theory for a while, is I do think that, not saying it'll happen this offseason, but I do think that AK is setting up for a succession plan. And that is that I adamantly think, and I know Winton Mahorn, shout out to my brother Winton, that's my dude. He does not like the concept of Billy Donovan moving to the front office. But I think that everything kind of keeps pointing to that. And I'm hearing more and more people say that as well, that it seems like a succession plan is in place. And I get it. Billy Donovan, as a head coach, has left much to be desired. But when you look at his history and people who, I would say the people who say, hey, he's better in college, a GM role actually kind of suits him better. And, for people like Winton, who say things like, well, what has he done as a coach to deserve the GM role? I'm not saying that he's anything in his coaching that has, but that doesn't stop him from having a skill set that may overlap there. And so I think the more we hear about Mark Eversley interviewing for positions, being finalists of positions, the Bulls would be remiss not to start preparing for the case if and when that does happen. I think it's more of a win than an if at this point. And that's not to say that Wes Unseld Jr. or Dan Craig are going to be the next head coach in line, but I do think they're going to get an opportunity whenever Billy Donovan moves on, whether it's to the front office or not, that they're going to get an opportunity, but the Bulls still should interview other candidates. And so now with the one spot they have left on Billy Donovan's coaching staff, I hope that they go after a younger coach, maybe somebody who's kind of unproven, that we all don't know by name and stuff like that, but maybe they continue filling it out with veteran head coaches. But let me know what you guys think down below, right? How do you feel about the Bulls filling out Billy Donovan's coaching staff so far? Do you like the hires? Do you not like the hires? Let me know what you guys think on that down below. And what do you think they should do with the final spot on Billy Donovan's bench? Do you think they should go with another veteran coach? Or do you think they should more so go with a kind of young, maybe up-and-coming coach they can find somewhere else that has a lot of promise? Let me know what you guys think on that down below. But with that said, we're continuing our draft coverage. And today we're going to be looking at players that are kind of sleepers in the first round. Not sleepers in the sense of the draft overall, but in the first round. These are players that are all projected to go much lower than where the Bulls pick at number 11. Maybe they trade back. Maybe they pick up an additional pick by trading a player. But these are some of the other players that I was asked to cover and then also I wanted to cover, right? And the first one that I want to talk about is Evs. I believe the S is silent. I looked it up. I even Googled a pronunciation. They said the S is silent. So Yev or Ev, I believe is how you pronounce it, Missy. So there you go on that one. But this is a 20-year-old, 7 foot, 235-pound center who played at Baylor last season. And this is a guy who tons of upside, right? The story about him is going to be that upside. He's kind of unproven in a lot of sense. He's drawn NBA comps from Jalen Duren. But when you look at the things that are his strengths for sure, lob threat, shot blocking, this dude can block some shots. You're going to see some highlights if you're on the YouTube side of him and his shot blocking. And that shit is crazy. The timing, the anticipation, the understanding how to close out space using his wingspan. all those things as far as the shot blocking. We need some rim protection. Missy brings rim protection right away and rebounding, and he's a hustle player. This is a big energy guy who, like I said, is very raw, but he can work in any defensive scheme, and I think that's the thing when it comes down to it. Very strong, long arms, has great verticality as far as that being that lob threat as well. He comes in and he can be a rim protector for you right away. Also in pick and roll defense, his versatility to be able to guard multiple positions, that's something that you cannot overlook at all. And he has really good hands even at this young age of catching passes and finishing through contact as well. I like this guy's game, and the fact that he rebounds, he gives all heart and effort when it comes to rebounding part of the game. His offensive rebounding percentage is ridiculous, and that is something that you definitely need. And as far as defense, listen, again, outside of even when he gets boxed out, he still uses his athleticism and wingspan to still get absolutely big rebounds as well. So the thing when you look at some of the negatives with him as well is the fouling. He's gonna foul a whole hell of a lot to start off his NBA career. Hopefully that comes with time and he learns to be better at that. And also, he's not a good passer at all. So, that's not necessarily a bad thing at your big unless you're trying to run a more modern inside-out offense. So it's a knock, but it's not a huge knock, right? And so at the end of the day, I think that when on offensive rebounds and things like that, he brings such a skill set. He's kind of similar to Drummond in the fact that if he gets the offensive rebound, he's going to force it back up. He hasn't had a huge success, but it hasn't been a huge negative either. But it is something that he's going to get a lot of his own misses, and I think you're going to want to try to train him to hey, let's run some offense. Let's come out of that. And then his conditioning. There is some questions about his overall conditioning as well. For the minutes that he's able to play and at his size and strength and things like that, that can be a concern for you, right? So the fact that he only plays a little over 20 minutes a game at 23 minutes per game, that's a bit of a concern. And then when you look at his stats, the raw stats last year, in his freshman year at Baylor, 10.7 points per game on 61% shooting as well. Doesn't take threes, right? He understands his game. 5.6 rebounds per game, 1.5 blocks per game, and right over a half a steal per game as well. 1.1 turnovers per game as well. So, but 2.5 personal fouls. So, like I said, the fouling is something that I'm worried about. Not too worried about him being hugely turnover prone, but there is something there as well. But Missy is a player that I overall like. I just don't like at number 11 where the Bulls pick, right? And he bites at everything. He's much like, if you pump fake, he's going to bite on almost every pump fake. Now, he can recover from that pretty well with his athleticism and his length, but that is something that you got to look at going into his NBA game for real, for sure. So let me know what you guys think on that prospect. Next up, KyShawn George. This is a 20-year-old, 6'8", 200-pound small forward, and this is a guy who it's upside, right? This would be a huge upside pick. He played with the Miami Hurricanes last year. Didn't really offer a whole hell of a lot of scoring. He's a young prospect as well. Most of the guys that you see here that we're going to talk about as being kind of these sleeper picks in a way are players that, they're younger, right? And I think that plays a part in why they're kind of dropping down as well. He's gotten comparisons to Joe Ingles in some cases. He can guard multiple positions. He can hit the pull-up jumper really well. Also, solid shooter, right? He has a nice dribble package as well. He's made over 40% of his catch and shoot threes for sure, and 36.4 of his pull-up threes. So a 3-and-D player, potentially you're looking at him for. He can play make a little bit. Now, I wouldn't say run him as a point forward or anything like that, but he can do a little bit of playmaking, and he gives really good effort defensively. Now, some of the negatives with him isn't too explosive of an athlete, right? He gets blocked a lot as well in contests, and he's not really a physical player as far as getting to the lane and dealing with physical contact. And I think he's going to have to get a lot stronger at the NBA level for sure. But he's an unproven player, and this will kind of be more in line with like a Patrick Williams pick, right, or even a Dalen Terry pick, a pick that has not played a whole hell of a lot, right, but does have the upside there. The negatives are there, but it has tremendous upside as well. Again, in this draft, though, I don't know if I really want to see the Bulls go very high upside. Like, I want upside. Like, let's be clear. It's not that I want the Bulls to take players that have no upside. That's not the case. But I also want them to have something that's kind of proven in what they can do right now. And maybe the pull-up threes are enough in that case. This is another one of those players that if the Bulls had a additional first-round pick, I would love to take as the upside pick, whereas we go something more surefire earlier. But this is a guy, listen, it's an AK type pick, right? That's why when people asked about him, I was like, yeah, I'll cover him because it isn't a very AK type pick with what AK has done so far. I just hope that we see a little bit something different, right? So that's my thought process on that one. Let's get into the last prospect we're going to cover today. And this one is Kevin McCullar, I believe is how you pronounce it. The thing with this guy is, I'm going to start with the negatives here and then we'll get into the positives. One of the biggest negatives with him is that he showed such great progress in his senior year, but it was an outlier for him, right? So it's not typically how he produced. And so that brings questions as well. When you look at last year for him in college basketball, 18.3 points per game is what he averaged last year, right? And that's really good. He did that on solid enough shooting as well. 45% shooting from the field, 33% shooting from three, taking 4.5 3-pointers per game. He's also an 80% free throw shooter last year, chipped in 6 rebounds, 4 assists, still in a half per game as well, a half a block per game. Really active defender as well, right? But when you look at his other 4 years in college, 10.4 points, 10.1 points, 10.7 points. So he's not a guy who's typically had this volume. And so with late kind of bloomers like that, as they get older, you have to ask yourself, did he have that jump that he had last year just because of him being a senior and him being ahead of everybody else? Or is that something that you think is going to be consistent, right? He made 29.8% of his threes and 73.3% of his free throws over his first 4 seasons, and then he had that dramatic leap last season. But to get the negatives out the way, when you look at the positives for this kid, on-ball defense, great. Off-ball defense, great. Hustle, great, right? That's why even when he didn't have the scoring output like he had in this senior year, still really good. He improved as a perimeter scorer, and you got to give him credit for that. And maybe his reaches and shooting percentages are more indicative of something he's going to be able to be consistently. But even outside of that, high IQ player who communicates on the defensive side of the ball. He can play make as well, which, again, you're going into the more modern NBA where everybody can do a little bit more playmaking. He can facilitate on pick and rolls in that type of situation as well, and dribble handoffs. He's a natural player as far as the feel for the game. He can score from anywhere as of last year for sure, and he even has some post moves, being that, that small forward, power forward type combo there for him as well. So listen, I like this guy, 6'6". You're looking at him as playing maybe 3 positions because we know the Bulls like to go small at the power forward position. But his defense is legit, right? But he is a guy that is slated to go very late in the first round. And so at 11, it would absolutely be a reach for the Chicago Bulls to draft him there. But again, a guy that I think fits kind of the mold of what we've seen with AK does before. And he is somebody who can slide right in, immediately right in, and play a role for you, whether it be in the bench or anything else. So I like the kid. I like his game. I like his mindset. I like the intentionality. But again, it's just kind of that would be a very big reach for the Chicago Bulls. And with the talent that's above him, right, that has higher upside, and that still can contribute something now, I'd kind of rather them go that route. But it doesn't matter what I want, right? It's what AK comes down to. But let me know what you guys think on these prospects, man. As always, down below, I appreciate that. As we continue our draft coverage, some of the best draft coverage, most comprehensive draft coverage you're going to find, for the Chicago Bulls specifically, man. We're almost at 30 prospects covered. And I think I'm going to end up covering probably the most prospects I've ever covered in draft analysis this season. Because, just the way that this draft can go, right? The trades that the Bulls could make, things like that. I'm probably going to end up covering about 45 prospects when it's all said and done in this draft. But you guys can continue to let me know what you guys think down below. All right, we got a little bit in the mailbag to get into. I missed a email from Jamal and wanted to get into this email where he says this. I've commented before, but this is my first time sending a mailbag. Let me know if this would be better as a voicemail, and I'll call it in. Here's what I'll say, Jamal. Voicemails are always easier because, of course, I can play and people can hear your voice. But again, some people don't want to call. So you can either send a text message to the number or email. We'll take any of it. But he says this. Consider this scenario for the Bulls, or maybe after draft night, just including the framework. I haven't looked at the trade machine. The Bulls could use size, shooting, and to move on from Zach LaVine. The Hawks need to move on from Trae Young and DeJounte Perrin. The Spurs need a point guard for Wemby. The Spurs have the Bulls' first pick and multiple Hawks picks. Bulls' first-round pick next season in 2025. I think a trade sending LaVine to ATL with his Seattle guy and trade to the Spurs could work well. I think a good return for the Bulls could be DeAndre Hunter and our pick back, and maybe big like Fernando or Capella, depending on the salary matching. This could unlock our future picks, and AK could make other trades to stay competitive. and maybe send out Vooch for a better player. However, the potential barriers revolve around whether the Spurs are willing to give up any picks. Maybe they want our 11 pick or one of our key guys, or maybe they don't want to give up any Hawks picks. The Spurs and the Hawks also don't need us if they don't want Zach. But I doubt the Hawks want anybody from the Spurs. The picks could really throw all this into question, and AK seems hesitant to make moves. But if I were the GM, I would even consider throwing in the Portland first-round pick we have, because it seems likely to turn into 2 second-round picks anyway. Let me know what you think of getting involved in what the Spurs and Hawks might be doing. Here's the thing. I've said before that a 3-team trade for Zach LaVine is not outside the realm of possibility. Now, the Hawks and the Spurs and what they may do, now that the Hawks also have the number 1 overall pick, we don't really know the route that the Hawks are going to go. Are they going to try to stay competitive? They may sell off both DeJounte and Trae Young and go completely young, with sending out veterans like Clint Capella and go into a mode where they can acquire a lot of first-round picks. A lot of them will be low, but I like the way that you thought this out, right? And I do think that if the Bulls do a 3-team trade, this is the type of trade you're looking for. I just don't know if the Spurs and the Hawks, like you said, because they don't necessarily need the Bulls to facilitate that deal, would they? And I don't like the concept of the Bulls giving up our 11th overall pick this year, especially when we aren't guaranteed a pick next year in a very deep draft either. So all those things, to me, I would rather the Bulls, I'm not going to say rather them not get involved, because getting Hunter back and potentially Capella could do wonders for the Bulls. But I think it just comes down to the direction of all teams involved. But I like I've said many times, I do think that Bulls fans generally are going to be disappointed by what we get back for Zach LaVine. I just think that generally, but this is a very well thought out deal. And these are the type of trade scenarios that I appreciate. Well thought out, actually thinking about the needs of both teams. And I'm saying that this is a realistic deal. Doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to happen, but this is a very realistic deal that you laid out here. Very good thought out. Thank you for that, Jamal. And I think ultimately, like, if this is the type of deal that the Bulls get involved in, not giving up their own 11 pick, but if it does take the Portland pick that's going to turn into 2 seconds, I'm not too mad at that. Not too mad at that. But guys, let me know what you guys think down below. As always, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Make sure you guys are following the show at Bulls Central Pod. You can send us any feedback, questions, comments, concerns, bullcentralpod@gmail.com. Lastly, if you want to leave a text message and our voicemail for the mailbag, the number to do so, 773-270-2799. We are the number 1 spot for everything Chicago Bulls related, thanks to you guys. And like I like to end every episode on, go Bulls. Love you guys. See red if you can, y'all. Peace.
This has been a presentation of the Break Media.